Every single day, millions of people go to the gym, they lift weights, they run, they stretch, they sweat. They invest time, money, and real physical discomfort into building and maintaining their bodies. And I respect that completely. Physical health matters. But here's what strikes me every time I think about it. Those same people, many of them, will spend zero deliberate time training the one organ that controls everything else. The one that determines how they think, how they respond, how they make decisions, how they handle pressure, how they interpret their experiences, how they relate to other people, and ultimately, what kind of life they are capable of building. The brain, the mind, the most powerful and most neglected asset most people will ever possess. We live in a culture that has developed an elaborate infrastructure for physical training. Gyms on every corner, personal trainers, nutrition coaches, fitness apps with millions of users. But the equivalent infrastructure for mental training, for deliberately, systematically strengthening the mind, is treated as optional, as niche, as something reserved for monks or elite athletes or people with too much time on their hands. And the consequences of that neglect are everywhere. In the anxiety that paralyzes people who are otherwise capable, in the self-sabotage that derails people who are otherwise talented, in the mental rigidity that keeps people stuck in patterns they consciously want to escape but can't seem to leave, in the inability to focus for more than a few minutes without reaching for a distraction, in the chronic negative thinking that colors every experience with a gray that has nothing to do with the actual circumstances and everything to do with an untrained mind running its default programming. So before I go any further, I want to ask you this. When was the last time you deliberately, intentionally invested time in training your mind? Not passively consuming content, not scrolling, not even reading casually for entertainment, but genuinely, purposefully doing something designed to strengthen how you think, how you focus, how you process and respond to your own inner world? Drop your answer in the comments below. I want to know where you are starting from, because that honest answer is the beginning of something that can genuinely change your life. Now, let's go deep on this. The mind is not fixed. This is perhaps the most important scientific discovery of the last several decades of neuroscience, and it is still not widely understood or acted upon. For most of human history, the prevailing assumption was that the brain you were born with, or more precisely, the brain you developed in early childhood, was essentially the brain you were stuck with for life. Fixed neural pathways, fixed capacities, fixed personality traits, fixed intelligence, fixed emotional responses. The science has demolished that assumption completely. Neuroplasticity, the brain's demonstrated ability to reorganize itself, to form new neural connections, to literally rewire its own architecture in response to experience, learning, and deliberate practice, is now one of the most robust and replicated findings in all of neuroscience. Your brain is not a fixed object. It is a living, dynamic system that is constantly being shaped by what you do with it. The question is not whether your brain is changing. It is always changing. The question is whether you are directing that change intentionally or leaving it entirely to chance and circumstance. And here is the uncomfortable reality. If you are not deliberately training your mind, your environment is training it for you. Every hour you spend in shallow, fragmented, notification-driven digital consumption is training your brain toward distraction, toward shortened attention spans, toward the dopamine-driven compulsion to constantly seek novelty rather than sustain deep focus. Every hour you spend ruminating on problems without resolution is training your brain toward anxious, circular thinking. Every time you avoid a difficult thought or emotion by reaching for a distraction, you are training your brain to associate discomfort with escape rather than with the productive engagement that actually resolves it. The training never stops. Your brain is always learning, always adapting, always becoming better or worse at the patterns it is most frequently asked to perform. The only variable is whether you are the one setting the curriculum. I want to talk about focus first, because in the modern world, the ability to focus deeply and sustain attention on a single meaningful task for an extended period of time has become genuinely rare and correspondingly genuinely valuable. Microsoft Research published a study suggesting that the average human attention span has been decreasing in the era of smartphones and constant connectivity. Whether or not that specific finding holds up to scrutiny, what is undeniable from everyday experience is that deep, sustained focus is harder for most people now than it was a generation ago. And the reason is simple. We have trained our brains through thousands of hours of fragmented digital consumption to expect and seek constant stimulation. The moment a task becomes slightly difficult or slightly boring, the trained reflex is to reach for the phone, to check the notification, to switch to something that provides easier, faster stimulation. And every time you do that, you reinforce the pattern. You make deep focus harder the next time. Training your mind to focus is training it to resist that reflex. It is building what researchers call cognitive endurance, the capacity to stay with a difficult task, to tolerate the temporary discomfort of not knowing the answer, yet to resist the pull of distraction long enough for genuine insight and deep work to occur. Cal Newport, in his landmark book, Deep Work, argues compellingly that the ability to perform deep, focused, cognitively demanding work is becoming simultaneously rarer and more economically valuable in the modern economy. The people who can focus, who can sit with a complex problem for 2 uninterrupted hours and produce genuinely excellent work have a significant and growing advantage over those who cannot, and focus is trainable. Through practices like time blocking, through deliberate digital minimalism, through the discipline of single tasking rather than the myth of multitasking, you can rebuild and strengthen your capacity for deep focus. But it requires consistent, deliberate effort. It does not happen by accident. Now I want to talk about something that I consider even more foundational than focus, and that is the quality of your thinking itself. Because focus is a tool, and like any tool, its value depends entirely on what you are focusing on and how well you are thinking about it. Most people have never examined their own thinking processes. They have never asked, how do I actually form beliefs? How do I evaluate evidence? Am I reasoning toward the truth, or am I rationalizing conclusions I have already emotionally committed to? What are my cognitive biases, the systematic errors in thinking that affect all human beings, and how are they distorting my perception of my situation, my options, and my own capabilities? Cognitive biases are not a sign of weakness or low intelligence. They are features of human cognition, documented extensively in decades of research by psychologists like Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, whose work demonstrated that even highly intelligent, highly educated people are subject to systematic, predictable errors in judgment. Confirmation bias, the tendency to seek out and give more weight to information that confirms what we already believe. The availability heuristic, the tendency to judge the likelihood of events based on how easily examples come to mind rather than actual statistical probability. The sunk cost fallacy, the tendency to continue investing in something simply because you have already invested in it rather than evaluating it on its current and future merits. These biases shape decisions every single day in every domain of life for virtually every person who has never deliberately studied and worked to counteract them. Training your mind means developing metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking, to observe your reasoning processes from a slight distance and ask whether they are actually serving you or whether they are leading you astray. I want to address the emotional dimension of mental training, because this is where many people hit a wall. Training your mind is not purely an intellectual exercise. It is also, and perhaps more importantly, an emotional one. The quality of your inner life, your relationship with your own thoughts, your ability to observe and regulate your emotional states, your capacity to sit with uncertainty and discomfort without being destabilized by them is a direct function of how deliberately you have cultivated your inner world. Mindfulness practice, which has accumulated an impressive body of scientific evidence over the past 3 decades, is one of the most effective tools for developing this kind of inner strength. Not in the soft, superficial sense that the word sometimes carries, but in the rigorous, demanding sense of training yourself to observe your own mind without being automatically controlled by its contents. Research published in journals like Psychosomatic Medicine and Neuroimage has shown that consistent mindfulness practice produces measurable changes in brain structure, increasing gray matter density in regions associated with self-awareness, attention regulation, and emotional processing, while reducing activity in the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center that drives anxiety and reactivity. You do not need to become a meditator in the traditional sense to benefit from this. What you need is a practice, any consistent practice, of deliberately turning your attention inward and observing what is happening in your own mind without immediately reacting to it. This could be formal meditation. It could be journaling, which research has shown to be extraordinarily powerful for processing emotions, clarifying thinking, and building self-awareness. It could be the simple daily practice of asking yourself at the end of each day, what was I thinking today? What was I feeling? Where did my mind serve me well, and where did it work against me? That kind of regular self-examination is not navel-gazing. It is the systematic development of the most important relationship you will ever have, the relationship with your own inner world. Let me talk about the role of what you consume in training your mind, because this is an area where the choices people make have enormous consequences that they rarely think about explicitly. Your mind is shaped by its inputs. What you read, what you watch, what you listen to, who you spend your time with, what conversations you engage in. All of these are feeding your mind a constant diet that is either expanding and strengthening it or narrowing and weakening it. Reading deeply and widely, particularly books, which require sustained attention and engage your imagination and reasoning in ways that shorter content simply cannot, is one of the most consistently powerful tools for mental development that has ever existed. Research has linked regular reading with higher cognitive function, larger vocabulary, greater empathy, reduced cognitive decline in aging, and stronger critical thinking. The people I have observed who think with the greatest clarity, speak with the greatest precision, and navigate complexity with the greatest skill are almost universally voracious readers. That is not a coincidence. What you consume also shapes your beliefs about what is possible for the world and for yourself. If your primary mental diet consists of content designed to provoke outrage, anxiety, and tribal reaction, your mind will be trained toward those states. If your diet includes the biographies of people who have done remarkable things against remarkable odds, the ideas of thinkers who have expanded the boundaries of human understanding, the stories of individuals who have faced genuine adversity and grown through it, your mind will be trained toward possibility, toward resilience, toward the kind of expansive thinking that generates genuine solutions rather than just sophisticated complaints. Here is something I want to say directly, because I think it needs to be said. Taking the time to train your mind is an act of profound self-respect. It is the declaration that your inner life matters, that the quality of your thinking deserves investment, that you are not willing to simply run the default programming you inherited from your environment and never examine or upgrade it. In a world that is designed to capture your attention and monetize your distraction, choosing to deliberately cultivate your mind is almost a radical act. It is choosing depth over surface, substance over noise, long-term development over short-term stimulation. The returns on that investment are compounding and lifelong. A trained mind makes better decisions, and better decisions produce better outcomes, and better outcomes create better opportunities, and better opportunities enable a better life. A trained mind is more resilient in adversity because it has developed the tools to process difficulty rather than simply be overwhelmed by it. A trained mind is more creative because it has been fed rich, diverse inputs and has developed the capacity for the kind of deep associative thinking that generates genuine insight. A trained mind is more at peace because it has learned to observe its own contents without being tyrannized by them. Every investment you make in your mental training pays dividends in every area of your existence. There is no other investment with that kind of reach. So I am going to ask you to make a decision today, not tomorrow, not after you finish this video and think about it for a few days. Today, decide that your mind is worth training. Decide that you will invest deliberate, protected time in its development, in building your focus, in examining your thinking, in developing your emotional intelligence, in consuming inputs that expand rather than shrink your mental world. Start small if you need to. 30 minutes a day of deliberate reading, 10 minutes of journaling, 1 hour per week of focused, distraction-free deep work on something that genuinely challenges your thinking. The size of the starting step is less important than the commitment to take it and keep taking it. because the mind you train today is the mind you will use to navigate everything that comes next. Make it worth having. Drop a comment right now and tell me, what is one specific thing you are going to do this week to deliberately train your mind? Name it. Commit to it publicly. I will be reading every single one.